Hello and welcome to What's on My Mind with Fiona. I'm your host, Fiona Kane. Today I'm going to be going through some of the crazy stuff going on in the world at the moment and just starting a discussion about some of these things and continuing a discussion. Some of them is a continued discussion of things I have talked about before. Now, a few things that have been happening this week, particularly in Australia. So, in Western Australia, the Labor government passed an urgency motion in about a week ago, I think it was, to ram its sex self ID bill through Parliament with as little scrutiny as possible. So, anyone can now apply to change their legal sex in Western Australia, meaning that any man will now be legally able to legally identify as a woman and access female-only spaces and services, including bathrooms and refuges. So that is obviously a problem. You can't just be a woman just because you want to. Now, you can dress how you like, act how you like, whatever, but you cannot come into women's spaces just because you want to. It's just not okay. And the problem with this is that there's always been that percentage of men who become what used to be called transsexual. These men always understood that they were still men, but they like to look like women and dress like women, that kind of thing. And largely, in my experience of those people, is that they had dignity and they just wanted to get on with their life and they didn't want to cause anyone any problems. That was absolutely fine. But now what we have is the activist ideologues who do want to get in women's spaces, who do want to cause trouble, who do want to destroy our sporting careers. And there's a certain percentage of these people who are what is called autogynephiles. And essentially, they want to get into our spaces and dress like a woman because they get off on it. There is a percentage of them, I'm not saying it's all, but there's a percentage. So the problem with these complete self-ID laws where anyone can just sort of say they're a woman and get into women's spaces is it very much opens it up for those people. And I know I always hear the argument, we always could, men can go into women. Yeah, of course, physically anyone could walk into anywhere. However, now it's applauded, it's praised, it's perfectly okay. We're trying to make it so it doesn't seem unusual, so it won't spark anyone's concern. Whereas it should spark a concern if a man wants to be in a woman's and girls' space, and so we're changing it so that it doesn't spark concern. We're changing it so it's just normal to have men in your space, and that is a problem because that means that certain men will take advantage of that. And at the moment, there's things that you see. I know it's happened in the US. In the US, was it Planet Fitness? Now, I can't remember now which gym, so I don't want to say exactly which one it might have been then, but I'm not sure. But they had a man going in there to the to the sauna, I think it was, and the change rooms. And he was essentially going in there and basically hanging his goods out to show everybody, including the women who were sitting opposite him and their small children and their daughters. Those women complained and they were the ones who were banned and called bigots, right? So once upon a time, when men used to sort of hide in the bushes and sort of open up their trench coat and, flash, that used to be considered strange. That used to be considered against the law. That used to be considered really bad behavior. Now they go into a gym change room and go into a sauna and do it. They are brave and wonderful. And the women and children who don't want to see that are bigots. Therein lies the problem. It's not about the people the individuals who identify however they identify and just want to get on with their life and, have dignity, enjoy their life. The problem is when we say yes to anyone, we say yes to everyone. And unfortunately that brings in the consequences that we don't want, which is the men not only thinking it's okay to invade our spaces, but also being applauded for doing so. So therein lies the issue. So that's what's happened in Western Australia. Then what we have is we have, so in Queensland, so a breastfeeding advocate, Jasmine Sussex, she's been dragged before the Queensland Civil and Administrative Tribunal, and that's for alleged vilification after she raised concerns about men who identify as women attempting to breastfeed babies using certain drug hormone induced milk. So there's been no studies on whether or not this is safe and whether or not that the hormone-induced milk, I know women's milk is also hormone-induced, but it's naturally how it goes, as opposed to men who are taking hormones to do this. I don't know the safety of it. I don't know if it's safe or if it's not, but there's not enough information to say that it's safe. The other issue here is that the reason that some of these men are doing this is more about affirming themselves than it is about supporting the child. So essentially, Jasmine is just saying that, or I don't know if she said this, but this is generally her case. But the purpose of breastfeeding is to nourish a child. It's not to validate someone's gender identity, make someone feel good about themselves, or in some cases, again, there's a sexual component to this, right? So that's not what breastfeeding is about. It's about nourishing the child. So, and we don't know that it's safe, and it's unbelievable because like vitamins, mineral, everything. Like if you go on the databases that I go on to look at the safety of supplements for women that I treat who might be pregnant or breastfeeding, the amount of warnings against everything, pretty much everything is a problem because there's a lot of things we just haven't studied, and we haven't studied them because who wants to be the guinea pig? Who wants to be the one to go and take this supplement or this thing and do that thing and find out if it causes your baby to be damaged in some way, right? So, or you to have, accidentally lose a child or something like that. So, who wants to do these studies, right? We can't, in good conscience, safely do these studies. So there's just a lot of things we don't know about, and so they're just generally considered. A lot of things are just it's better to be safe than sorry, blah blah blah. Except when it comes to men affirming themselves and feeling better, apparently then it's perfectly safe, even though we haven't done it before really, except for a handful of cases, and we have no data to say that it's safe. And there's lots of different levels of safe there. Is what the child's drinking safe? And I would say that I don't know if they ever get a full breast milk, what a child actually needs. My understanding from breastfeeding people who are in this industry, industry is probably the wrong word for it. Anyway, health advocates who talk about breastfeeding is I don't think they get the full breast milk that has all of the nutrients in it. So they might have some sort of liquid, but I don't think it's what can safely uh, sustain a child. Let alone whether or not there's any issues because of the hormones or whatever it is that they've been used to take it. So there's a physical risk, and then there's also the risk of is this baby being used as a prop? And unfortunately, I think sometimes that is the case. And it's really a shame because there's people I know who are sort of gay couples, like two men who have had children through surrogacy. And there's a handful that I know of who I actually think they're really good guys, and they're really well intentioned, and I'm sure they are good fathers, and all of the right things. But I've also seen a lot of people online. It doesn't seem to be about that for them, and they're quite concerning, and they seem quite disturbed. And my concern for the physical and emotional safety of those children is really there. And so I'm not saying this is not everybody, but we need to. There always was safeguarding for children, right? And the rule was just think every man could be a creepy old man, and then you go from that place, right? We always have, right? Safeguarding for children just means assume everyone's a creeper and work backwards from there, right? So that you keep children safe, so that you don't sort of take that risk. And it seems that it is that case, unless it's a man who wants to identify as a woman, in which case we can't take any of those things into concern because he might be offended. Excuse me, I'll just have a drink. So yes, the worst thing you can do is offend someone who wants to be affirmed. So So the next thing that's happened is another case in Australia, and this is in Victoria. So Moira Deeming, who was in the Victorian Liberal government. Liberal in Australia is Conservative, for those of you who may be overseas. So she was in this government, and Posey Parker, otherwise known as, my brain's not saying her name, Kelly J. Keane. She came to Australia. I can't remember. I think it was last year. So she came to Australia to do Let Women Speak. And Let Women Speak is essentially an event where she usually goes on a corner somewhere or a park or something like that, has a microphone, and invites women to get up and say what's on their mind. It's not a hate group. It's not sort of anything like that. It's just, hey, you want to have something to say, get up and say it. And of course, anyone who supports women's rights, like J.K. Rowling, whoever it is, unfortunately, that is now being called anti-trans, right? So to be pro-women automatically means to be anti-trans. It's interesting, isn't it? So if being pro-women and pro-girls and pro-young girls, if that means being anti-trans, then does it tell you something about the trans movement? And not talking about the individuals, talking about the ideologues and the activists. So just automatically you're anti-trans if you're pro-women. There's a problem there, isn't there? So anyway, of course they get labelled as being, whenever they talk about them on the news, it's disgusting. The news doesn't say pro-women and in support of women and women's rights advocates or activists. It says anti-trans, an anti-trans rally. It's not an anti-trans rally, it's a pro-woman rally, or pro-women discussion, or whatever the thing is called. And it's only called anti-trans because if it's pro-women, it's automatically anti-trans, apparently. So anyway, she was at this event with Kelly J. Keane and some other women last year, and a handful, I think it was 10 or 12, maybe 20, I don't know, of these stupid neo-Nazi blokes turned up, and they were just sort of stood over to one side, whatever, they were there. And they had nothing to do with the women. They had nothing in common with the women. They're just there because there's always this, at all of these events, you get these kind of rent-a-crowd people who turn up just to take advantage, right? So that's what happened at this event. And essentially the women got blamed for these men showing up as if it had anything to do with them. And so Maura Deeming was blamed for this. And essentially the Liberal leader in the Victorian Liberal Party, he claimed that she was, I don't know, I can't remember exactly what he claimed, so I will just say apparently, potentially, but something along the lines of that she was a Nazi or a neo-Nazi, or that she was in league with neo-Nazis or something, right? So something along those lines, and she eventually got kicked out, or at least maybe banned for, I think it might have been 12 months from the party. And that was just for being there, right? And it had anything to do with neo-Nazi. She had nothing to do with them. It was because she was standing up for women. People don't like that these days, right? So anyway, there's defamation proceedings happening at the moment in Victoria, and I don't know where we're at with it. I haven't heard any outcome of that, but I hope that Moira wins. She did nothing wrong. When you hear a story, I think she's got a background of either she's from a Jewish family or grew up with a Jewish, I can't remember now, but she's not neo-Nazi, not even vaguely. She's just pro-women, which is the worst thing it can be, right? So whatever. So that was what's in the news this week as well. Okay, so another issue for women, a lesbian action group. They've been to the Administrative Appeals Tribunal in Melbourne again, to challenge the decision of the Australian Human Rights Commission, forcing them to include men who identify as lesbians in their events. Right, so this is what happened in Australia now, is that now lesbian women can't have events without men who say they're women attending those events as well. Why can't women just have events on their own? Men, and I'm happy for men too as well. Like, what? But they can't because these men want to be affirmed. And that is the issue with this kind of man who wants to just push their way into women's spaces and stuff, these ideologues and activists, is they need to be affirmed. It's all about being affirmed. That's why they can't go and have their own space. They need to be in our space and be affirmed by us as being the same as us. And if they're not, there's a problem and they go after us. There was an example this week that went around X with a video of it's like a Zoom meeting with basically a guy dressed up as a woman telling the woman that she would affirm him and call him a woman. And if she doesn't, she was going to be in trouble and he was going to have her job. And that's just how it works, right? You must affirm me. And if you don't affirm me, then I'm going to go after your job. I'm going to go after you. I'm going to get death threats, this threat, that threat. That's how it works, right? Misogyny, the new misogyny. But this is they're brave when they do that. They're wonderful and brave, and the women are just bigots, of course. Anyway, so and that's the thing about, I think with I don't know, my understanding when I talk to people who are lesbian, gay, that sort of thing, and when I hear them on podcasts and things, is it would appear to me that the LGB and the T, I don't know that they're going to stick together, and I don't even know that they are together. I think the T are the ones that invented the fact that they were all together, because the T seems to cancel a lot of the L, G, and B, right? Because essentially, once upon a time, you used to have, girls who are tomboys or boys who are a bit effeminate, and they may or may not have been gay, and that was fine, whatever. But now it's like, well, you can't be gay, you must be the opposite sex. You need to have hormones and surgeries and blah, blah, blah. So actually almost shaming gays and cancelling the gay people and making them all go trans, which is interesting because I think it's what they do in Iran. Because it's illegal to be gay, so it's better to go and get your bits cut off and pretend to be the opposite sex. Then that's acceptable, right? So it's interesting that we do that here, just in the different names of. We use different language around it and different reasoning for it. But so anyway, and we're not allowing gay people to have their own spaces. So lesbian women. I just won't even get into it here, just the language and stuff, but the amount that lesbian women are told that they just need a good, I won't say what that is, and it used to come from other people, and now it's coming from the T people, and what you can do with their girl bit. I won't say what that bit is, but it's like a shortened version of the name Richard. They say this stuff all the time. It's revolting, the stuff that they say to women for not wanting to be part of their charade, right? So the other thing that happened this week is that Senator Pauline Hanson, she proposed a bill to get our sex-based rights back in Australia in the Sex Discrimination Act, which, as I've said before, Julia Gillard, our first female Prime Minister, took us out and made it about gender identity and not about sex. So that's why all these things are happening in law and courts, because women can't defend ourselves because we don't exist as a category that's separate from how I feel. So gender trumps sex now. So anyway, Senator Hanson tried to restore our rights, which rightfully so. The first time she brought it in, they wouldn't even have, in the Senate, they would not even have the discussion. They shouted it down, wouldn't have the discussion. Second time, they started having the discussion, and essentially all of our left parties think it's horrendous because it's destroying people and harming people to have a conversation about women's sex-based rights. Okay, so women, 50% of the population, trans population, I don't know the percentage, but it's very small. And apparently, because we might offend that small percentage of the population, we need to take away the rights from the 50%. That makes sense. Yes, that makes a lot of sense. So all these, and as women, all these women screaming and hollering about how we can't have these discussions about women's sex-based rights. These are the same women who would be out marching on the streets for, about domestic violence and for women's rights and about, they're all about the gender pay gap, all these other things, but they're fighting against sex-based rights. It's just amazing. Anyway, that's what was going on, and it's sort of, I think they keep voting it down, and they said they're just going to keep voting it down no matter how many times it comes along. Now, there's just one other thing I wanted to cover. I'll be back in a moment. I'm back. So something this week that J.K. Rowling actually said on X, formerly known as Twitter. I'm going to read it out to you. It's kind of longish, but I think it's actually worth hearing. And actually, what I will do before I read that out, I think I've read this one before. I might have read it last week, but I'm going to start with this one and then I'll read the J.K. Rowling one. So this one is Thomas Sowell, And he says, when you want to help people, you tell them the truth. When you want to help yourself, you tell them what they want to hear. Okay, so that's when you want to help people, you tell them the truth. When you want to help yourself, you tell them what they want to hear. So that's Thomas Sowell. And he's so right with that. And so much of this, what was talking about last week, all of the virtue signaling and all of the toxic compassion, is telling people maybe what they want to hear in the moment, but it's not what they need to hear, and it's not what's really truly compassionate and really helpful. What's really compassionate, if a child comes to you and says that they are confused about their gender, or they think there might be something else, whatever it is, yes, have compassion, and yes, listen to that child and hear what's going on for them, and help them with therapy or what it is. Help them explore what's going on for them. In so many cases, these children have been sexually abused, or they're autistic, or there's other things that are affecting them. But also just that coming into that age where where suddenly you've got curves and things like that, and suddenly men start leering at you and people start noticing, and all of those things, it's very stressful. So there's so many things that bring this on, and it is not compassionate to say, yes, you're opposite sex, yes, we must cut your bits off and whatever. That's not compassion. Compassion is actually helping them travel through puberty and learn to live with their body, and learn to accept that their body is beautiful and all of those things. So that's what compassion really is. Now, what J.K. Rowling said this week, she said, and I totally agree with this. And that's the other thing, in so the trans ideologues and activists, what they say all the time, they say there's a trans genocide. There's a trans genocide. Like, the trans people are being murdered everywhere. And they tell trans people that everyone hates them and everyone's being murdered everywhere, and you're all, and look, the only reason people are beginning to really dislike these people is because, when transvestites used to dress up and go and do nightclubs, no one had a problem with that. It's adult entertainment. That's what it's supposed to be. But when they started wanting to do drag time story hour and be with your children and read them inappropriate things and turn up all sexualized for your children, then people had a problem, right? They also, again, when there were transsexual men doing their thing, no one had a problem. But when those men wanted to be in women's change rooms and take over women's sports and in our refuges and things like that, people had a problem. And the same for, now that my brain's just clapped out. What's the other thing I was thinking of? Oh, children, transing the kids, right? No one had a problem when adults made the decisions that they wanted to do, or not many people had a problem. But now suddenly they're trying to convince your child that they're in the wrong body, and they need to be medical patients for the rest of their life, and end up with osteoporosis when they're 20, and sexual dysfunction and infertility and pain and all the things that's going to happen to them potentially when they have all of these surgeries and hormones and things. So it's that's no one a lot of people, most people didn't have a problem until all of those things, right? So the reason that people are disliking the community, and it's not like, I don't know, it's calling people a community, that lots of individuals with all different points of view, but the reason that people have a problem is because they're actually actively harming people now. And that's the other thing I didn't mention. I don't have the information in front of me, but I know in Scotland recently there was, for years now, there's been a woman's rape crisis centre, and there was a man put in charge of that, a man who considers himself to be a woman. The person who put him in that role is a really big trans activist, and he's been in this space, and women have been, women will be in there and then they'll suddenly realize there's a man in their space, and women have been gaslighted and treated really, really badly in that centre. And they've been complaining for years, and finally it's all sort of coming out, and he's getting in trouble and he's lost his job, and they're questioning it. A rape crisis centre, right? The last thing you want for a woman in a rape crisis centre is a man, right? Just goes without saying, not because all men are bad. It's just because that's not women are traumatized, right? I mean, it's just common sense. So anyway, I'm going to read to you what J.K. Rowling said. So she said, An infallible recipe for poor mental health and lifelong unhappiness is believing that unless the entire world validates your self perception, it hates you. If you move through life telling yourself that unless you can force other people to play along, you'll be erased, and that's what they say, we're being erased. Um, if the slightest if the slightest hint that another person doesn't see you the way you've labeled yourself feels like an attack on your very existence, which is what they're told it is, your life will be spent in a state of miserable insecurity and fragility. And it was actually a lot longer than that, but that was the main part that I wanted to. If we bring children up to think that the world hates them and it's out to get them and the whole world must validate you and you have to wear your pronoun badge, and if someone doesn't see your pronoun badge and use your pronoun, it's because they hate you and they want to cancel you and they want you to be erased and there's a genocide. If you're being fed that constantly, you would have poor mental health, right? You'd feel really, really bad. And that if they can never be okay unless other people validate them and say, yes, you really are, whatever it is, then that indicates a major mental health issue that you need to address. And that's an inside job, not an outside job. The outside world cannot just affirm you constantly in everything you need. A lot of that has to come from the inside. And it is a terrible recipe for poor mental health when we teach people this. When we teach people to be perpetual victims, we teach them that the world hates them and that unless people out here do or say something, that you can't be okay. That is a really a recipe for poor mental health. And she says further down, she says, vulnerable young people are being harmed by your kind of hyperbolic language. They are. When you use this hyperbolic language, it really does, and see what they do is they talk about the inevitability that these children will uh, take their own lives, and they do. Look, I'm not saying that none of these children are feeling that way. They certainly are, and I think that is for all the other reasons I've already talked about. The fact that they've got mental health issues, not because that people won't affirm them, although because they're being told that people won't affirm and then they hate them and they want to erase them, that might make them feel that way, right? So they actually feel that way probably more because of the pressure that people put them on around it. The other thing is too that these children are taught that they have to say that they feel this way to get the treatment. So they all say it, and some may feel that way and some probably don't. And there's probably both. I'm not saying that there's no such thing, but just saying they're given a list of things they have to say. You go online, it's very easy to find. They get a list of these are all things you have to say if you want your parents and the medical community to agree to gender affirming care, which I would think gender affirming care is affirming you in the sex that you are in, right? That would be the most caring thing to do. So she's saying that vulnerable young people are being harmed by your kind of hyperbolic language, which promotes the lie about the inevitability of self-harm, self-deletion among. I'm just changing that word slightly. I'm not saying her words exactly. By the gender questioning, among the gender questioning, unless they've given. Sorry, I didn't read that very well. The inevitability of the self-deletion among the gender questioning unless they're given often irreversible medical interventions. Rhetoric like this flies in the face of everything we know about mitigating the risk of self-harm, self-deletion among those with mental health issues. It's particularly gruesome when done by self-congratulatory people on Twitter whose banner is be kind. And that's the thing. So when you teach a group of people that they are oppressed, they are hated, they are vulnerable, everyone's out to get them, and everyone must affirm them, you are feeding into that poor mental health. Because look, if anyone else went to therapy and came in and said to the therapist, the whole world's out to get me, everyone hates me, people want to delete me, people want to, the therapist wouldn't say, yes, you're right. The therapist would actually help them understand how they can manage their health and their mental health in the world and get on in the world and not be paranoid that the world is out to get them, right? But in the case of these ideologues actually teach this to the children. And, there's this connects back to Marxism and essentially the whole, what they did, what Mao did in in China is in that sort of cultural revolution is make children hate their parents and damage the children. So the children would be as foot soldiers, and the same thing's going on here. Damage the children, so they will be out doing your advocacy and being ideologues and activists on your behalf. So it works in the favour of certain people, unfortunately. Anyway, I will leave it there, but that's the stuff going on in the world this week that's, very frustrating. And I have all of the compassion in the world, but I just think the compassion's been pointed the wrong way, and it's harming a lot of young people, and it's harming women. And we need to defend women's spaces while we still can, because this is not okay. And I speak to a lot of people every week, and there's a lot of people who agree with me but won't speak up for fear. I understand why, but we need to reclaim women's rights, women's sex-based rights and safety, and start to look again at children's safety. And number one is assume everyone's a creeper and go from there, rather than just, oh, but this person is brave and amazing, and so they can't be harmful to my child. No, that's not the truth. Anyway, please like, subscribe, share, tell other people about this podcast. This is also on Rumble and YouTube, so on video for those who want to watch it there, and you can comment there. Otherwise, it is in all of the usual places, or will be very soon. It's finally on iTunes, and it's coming to other places soon as well. Hope you have a great week. Talk to you next week. Thanks. Bye.